Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Hey, I'm glad you could come to our Halloween party. Everything good by you?
Everything's good by me. I'm just trying to get my costume together. I ordered the pieces of the costume on Amazon, and hopefully they'll arrive today. Do you want to know what the costume is ahead of time, or do you want to be surprised?
No, please let me know. I also need inspiration.
Oh yeah. Have you ever seen Star Trek: Strange New Worlds?
No, yeah, but I probably should.
Well, Star Trek: Strange New Worlds is great. It's the best Star Trek since Deep Space Nine, which was on when I was a kid, and it's basically it's like a modern update of the old Star Trek. And it's just really it's actually a prequel to the old Star Trek. So they have some of the same characters. It's about the Enterprise before, like Kirk and Spock and those guys. Well, so Spock is still on it, and Uhura and a couple of the other people who were on the original show are on this one. But then it's got a bunch of other people, and the captain is not Kirk; it's Pike. And so in Star Trek lore, Captain Pike is the captain, but then he gets disfigured and disabled by this horrible accident, and then Kirk takes over. And so this is with Pike, and he's just hilarious. The way they did this captain, he's just like, every captain has their own personality. Kirk was the like sort of dynamic, like take charge kind of adventurer guy, and then Picard is this like cerebral, thoughtful, intellectual guy, and then Cisco is this like sort of passionate, very moralistic, kind of like war leader, and then et cetera, et cetera. But then Pike is just laid back. He's chill dude, and he cooks for the rest of the crew, and he's never too worried that they're gonna die. He's just like, oh yeah, I'll probably make it out of here. And he's just super laid back, and it's pretty great. And part of that is because he's had a premonition that he's gonna like suffer this horrible accident and be disfigured. So he sort of has this fatalistic, sort of accepting outlook on life. And so anyway, he's a great character, and I'm gonna be him for Halloween. I noticed that my hair is going a bit gray here. And although I've always thought about dyeing it a fun color, but before I do that, I'm going to style it up in the style characteristic. He has this characteristic trademark high fade where it just like goes like that. It's hilarious. Hair. You can just look up Captain Pike haircut. Anyway, I'm going to go get some hairstylist people to do this for me. And I'm going to have Captain Pike hair for a week.
Oh, amazing. Oh, can't wait to see it.
And then I have the uniform, Star Trek uniform.
Oh, that's great. So let's get into a few of the topics from the posts that you've had recently. So one is it fair to summarize your progressive project post around what remains of the progressive project? Is it fair to say that basically, the world is, we're more left wing than we were in 2012, but not more left wing than we were in 2020? That basically there's been this kind of moderation, or this almost, I don't want to say hockey stick growth in terms of more progressivism, and then sort of a little bit of a down period, and so how would you kind of define, is that accurate in terms of the direction?
Well, I think that is accurate, but what I'm saying is actually more than that. So that's sort of a pendulum swinging thermostatic politics kind of thing. And I do think that's real. I think that's happening. But I think something else is happening too, which is that, so let's go back in history. In the late 70s and then 80s, we had this conservative movement that went along. So in economics, we had ideas like, free markets, et cetera, but also ideas like local control, which gave us NIMBYism, which is the opposite of free markets, but felt similar to people because it gave you more individualized control. So we had that in the economic sphere, and then we had conservative Christianity had a big revival in the 80s, and some people called that the Third Great Awakening. And then we had sort of Reaganite ideas on a number of things, sort of the strong anti-communism, which kind of then morphed into the war on terror under Bush. We sort of slotted Al-Qaeda in for the Soviet Union. And so we had all this conservatism, and then liberals had kind of, floundered, right? After the 60s and 70s, they sort of floundered. They felt like, where do we go from here? And they didn't really know where to go from there. And so basically they started rebuilding in the 80s. And a lot of the things we know as progressivism right now had their roots in liberal culture, in like, you listen to Pixies songs from the 80s, and you can start to see the idea of what we now know as progressive culture start to emerge. And of course, that's artificial periodization on my part, right? It didn't really start then. There were through lines from the 60s and 70s and all the way back to like the 1800s, whatever you want, right? And there's always those through lines in American stuff, but I would say that there is this mounting wave of progressivism since the late 80s. And at first it started as an underground thing. Artists like Keith Haring, I wrote that essay for New Year's about his unfinished painting and how some goofy internet person used AI to, like, quote unquote complete the famous unfinished painting that symbolizes his, like, impending death from AIDS. And so, there was AIDS activism, there was gay activism, there was so like the push for gay rights and gay marriage really intensified around then. And then that was the antecessor, that was the predecessor of the sort of modern trans movement. Picked up, where the gay movement kind of left off. And so then you had a revitalized feminist movement, another wave of feminism, and you're probably too young to remember. In fact, I'm too young to remember. But then people slightly older than me talk about how in the early 90s there was this wave of let's write women with a Y so it doesn't have the word men in it, kind of thing. That was the 90s, and the first big push against sexual harassment, the push to actually criminalize it and to or not to sue companies, maybe, let's say civil suits, over sexual harassment. That really intensified in the 90s because you had women finally had joined the workforce en masse, and finally their labor force participation topped out in the 90s. And so it was like, now let's get equal rights in the workplace. And so that was really what you saw. And so you had this progressivism that built and built, and then of course you add elements as we go on. You add opposition to the Iraq War and the war on terror. And then you had sort of economic anger over the inequalities associated with the Great Recession. You had Occupy Wall Street, things like that. And then you had, through all of this, there was a reinvigorated concern for Black people. And I think that was a little slower to build, but characteristic of America, when it finally did build, it was stronger than the other movements. So you saw BLM being the strongest activist movement in the 2010s. But even though, like, go back to the mid 2000s, and people weren't really talking about Black people's situation that much. You got Kanye West saying George Bush doesn't care about Black people. Where's Kanye now? But then, because George Bush didn't mount a stronger response to Hurricane Katrina, so you saw increasing Black cultural influence through of course hip hop and I don't know, NBA, like other things where Black people were very prominently visible. You saw that increase in like the 90s and 2000s, but you didn't see the activism until later. But then all these things sort of built up over time, and then this modern progressive movement was cobbled together from a lot of these things. And then I'm a firm believer in the idea that street movements go first and then intellectuals come later and try to rationalize it. Because if you look at communism, you see that in 1848 there were all these would-be revolutions, mostly failed, but a few succeeded, but attempted revolutions in European countries. Sort of this post-Napoleonic, like, let's all have freedom and also equality kind of thing. In Europe, pretty much revolutions are class revolutions. And so you saw that in 1848, and then Karl Marx, who was just sitting there thinking about economics, was like, oh my God, shit's going down. The world's changing. And so he wrote the Communist Manifesto as a tool for the protesters and the revolutionaries to try to use this to organize their thinking about what they should want and what kind of society they should want. Sort of big think for activists. The activists were in many ways reacting against oppression and just sort of expressing indefinite liberalism. And Marx came along and was like, here's what you want. You want, like ownership of the means of production, blah, blah, blah. And of course, some people bought that and some people didn't, but it gave direction, to the socialist movement for a really long time in Europe, because it crystallized a lot of the class resentments that Europe had. But intellectuals came second, right? And street revolutionaries came first. And that's not, I wouldn't say, like, there's obviously sometimes there's intellectuals writing about ideas for a long time before a wave of activism happens, but I don't think they necessarily prompt that wave of activism. I'm a big believer in self-organizing grassroots stuff. And I think that intellectuals came along and tried to say, okay, so what do we actually want? We've got this dissatisfaction with neoliberalism, if you will. We've got this dissatisfaction with, sort of race relations, gender relations in America. And we've got dissatisfaction with other things. How are we going to operationalize this? What's our theory? What's our organizing idea here? And I think you come up with economic thinkers like Elizabeth Warren and the people at the Economic Policy Institute and the CPR and these other progressive think tanks, start and Hewlett, of course, which everyone talks about. They started trying to codify some of these ideas. And here's what we want. We want a stronger labor movement. When they talk about power, they're talking about unions. That's what they're talking about. They're essentially, when the economic progressives talk about power, they're only ever talking about unions. Like, there's other ways of now, Elizabeth Warren tried to make it about something slightly different than unions with co-determination. People have talked about wage boards a little bit, but it's entirely unions. And so it's like, okay, let's bring back unions, revitalize that. That's one idea that we have. Let's regulate the finance industry. Let's, that was a big push after, Occupy Wall Street, obviously. So there were some of these, and then some of these concrete ideas like, fight for 15 higher minimum wages, which is an AstroTurf movement and one that I support, but but it was AstroTurf. It was just some rich guys came up with 5 for 15.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to try to find the ways to do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. It's easy to see why the Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Econ 102 at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. As a developer, the journey from concept to production-ready LLM apps is fraught with challenges. Dealing with unpredictable LLM outputs, correctly handling PII, and ballooning API costs can all be blockers to shipping your next AI-powered feature. Weights and Biases Weave is a lightweight AI developer toolkit designed to simplify your LLM app development. With Weave, you can trace and debug input, metadata, and output with just 2 lines of code. Weave helps you run rigorous evaluations and securely manage all of your data sets and system configurations, so you can focus on what matters most, iterating and improving on your LLM-powered applications. Plus, Weave integrates seamlessly with your favorite APIs and libraries, including OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral AI, Cohere, LangChain, Llama Index, and more. Make real progress on your LLM development and visit wnb.me/cr to get started with Weave today. That's wnb.me/cr.
Are a lot of movements astroturfed?
The more specific policy goals are, the more likely it is to be AstroTurf. Let's say that. So fight for 15, is AstroTurf because you have 15 in the name. But then certain movements like Black Lives Matter is not AstroTurfed because that's what are you fighting for? Their lives matter. Yes. Okay, cool. They do. Now what? Like the people, BLM didn't really know what they were fighting for. Is just anger at police brutality, anger at just general situation of race relations in America as well. And so that was not AstroTurfed at all. And in fact, a lot of the organizations that called themselves Black Lives Matter, BLM Atlanta or whatever the bullshit, like those were not affiliated with the street activists very much. Those people, they showed up to protest, but no one knew who the hell they were. And afterwards, when they went home, called themselves BLM Atlanta and then started posting shit on their Facebook page. No one knew who they were then either. And then they grifted a bunch of money and embezzled it and ran away because those were not the people who created the street movement. It provided a convenient thing for conservatives to look, the BLM Atlanta people are so corrupt. Well, yeah, because they have nothing to do with this disorganized grassroots bottom-up movement. I think often what's a paradox is that intellectual conservatives have trouble understanding grassroots movements. And you see this go all the way back to 1848. People were like, there's some secret French directorate that's organizing these. Let's find them. And then you had the Austrians and the Russians both sent who were their conservative powers in Europe at that time, both sent their secret police to go find the secret French. They thought of all liberalism as French, right? Because of Napoleon, because of the revolution. And so they sent their guys to France who, to become, agent provocateurs, to pretend to be, like basically revolutionaries to smoke out the French directorate that they imagined existed, which didn't exist. What do you think happened to all those secret police from Austria and Russia?
What happened?
They arrested each other.
Oh my God.
And so they played Keystone Cops for a long time because there was no French directorate. There were only people pretending to be fake revolutionaries. And they all arrested, the Austrians and Russians arrested each other. And so there was none, but the conservative intellectuals like Metternich, like, Tsar Alexander, had no real concept of a grassroots movement. What's ironic is that in America, conservatism often comes from the grassroots as well. And then the intellectuals don't really understand that. I think you see someone like J.D. Vance, he's an intellectual conservative. And he's spent his entire life trying to understand the grassroots conservatism that is the way he got elected and that can power his election. But his understanding of it is incomplete and, or at least seems very incomplete. And I would say that, tech conservatives, right? And I would say that they imagine that they're connected to a working class in the heartland, but they're not connected to it personally. Maybe they grew up with those people and ran away from them to the coast, but they don't, they don't hang out and have a beer with some guy with like guns in his truck. They don't. They have to imagine what that guy's like from Twitter, from, urban legends, from Fox News, from like, they don't connect. They don't watch YouTube. They don't watch those people on YouTube. They could find out what those people are like from YouTube, honestly, a little bit, not completely, because you have to live with people to really know what they're like. I grew up with those people. I know working class conservatives. I understand them better than, and I paid attention, right? I had the head of Future Farmers of America, which now is just called FFA with no meaning for the acronym because they were embarrassed by the name farmers, but which I think is dumb. Farming is great. But then the head of our FFA branch taught me to play chess in high school. I wasn't one of those guys. I'm not a redneck, but I know rednecks. I know what they're like. And I think that a lot of these, elite conservative guys, like, Mike Solana, our friend Mike Solana, he doesn't know what rednecks are like. He knows what sort of Cuban guys who really hate Castro. He knows what those guys are like. But he doesn't know what like your average Mexican-American redneck living in San Antonio, the suburbs of San Antonio, thinks. And I do. I'm not super in touch with like the right-wing working class, but I'm more in touch than like Mike Solana or than intellectual conservatives that we know. Or like, some Euro dude like Sam Oberja comes over here and he's like, I will theorize American conservative. No, like you don't know what's going on. Like, or, people like that. Like one partial exception is Mark Andreessen, who I know grew up with, he grew up with some rural conservatives, and he understands a bit what they're like. And then, he went to University of Wisconsin. I think he also lived in Iowa, I want to say.
Yeah. I know he lived in the Midwest. I can't remember where.
Yeah. I think he lived in a couple of places. And then, but he understands better and more intuitively. But still, he's been here forever, right? He escaped. He ran away to the coast. I did too. Like I for me, it wasn't as much running away from, redneck areas, because honestly, those places, like my hometown used to be insanely conservative and is now pretty liberal, College Station, Texas. I felt the need to discover more of the world, but I didn't hate, conservative world. I didn't feel that like this is a bad world that I need to get away from, or I need to get away from the working class people. But all the same, I wanted to discover other new stuff. I wanted to discover people from all over the world. I'm a xenophile, right? I wanted to get out. Anyway, that was a big rant. But I guess the point is that you've got conservatives trying to theorize what the movement's about. Okay, let's get back to progressivism. Okay, we got this big rant. You can edit this all down later, obviously, to be more coherent. But progressivism was building and building, and then these intellectuals came along and determined ideas for it. So like Ta-Nehisi Coates, or I guess his name is actually pronounced Ta-Nehisi, but I don't know. I'm an American. I read things phonetically, and we've never actually met in person. But so Coates, he was sort of the leading intellectual of sort of the racial aspect of progressivism. He gave this idea, the carceral state. That's a term that he didn't invent that term, but he used it a lot, and he mainstreamed it. And he's like, okay, the justice system is inherently racist and an extension of Jim Crow. We need to. He wasn't the only person who said that. Like Michelle Alexander said that. No one listens to Michelle Alexander. They listen to Coates. And so he said, we need to let all, like, he didn't really say we need to let a crap ton of people out of prison, but that's what he thought. And that's what I thought. Like the idea that incarceration's gone too far and we need to let a bunch of people out. I believe this strongly. I'm a little on the fence about this now, but there, like this was he codified a sentiment that was sort of this grassroots sentiment and said, all right, so carceral state, that's a problem. Reparations, that's a thing we need to do. And so he gave sort of focus and direction. Elizabeth Warren came up with a whole bunch of, regulatory antitrust, stricter regulation of certain things, and then stronger unions. And then, there higher taxes, blah, blah. But higher taxes and more welfare spending figure much less into the current incarnation of progressivism than they did into the 70s version. Like tax and spend liberal, that I am one. And like our friend JDC Medlock, the pseudonymous guy from the East Bay, he's a tax and spend liberal, and I'm a tax and spend liberal, right? But and Biden's a tax and spend liberal, but that hasn't featured as much in progressivism, in what progressives want to do. And then you got Heather Boushey, who said care jobs. The future of work is care work. When the robots take our jobs, what we'll need to do is care for each other, and so we need to lean into that, by supporting care work and demand for care work. And so those were some of the ideas. And then socially, you had a bunch of ideas like, decarceration, the progressive DAs, the so-called Soros DAs, because Soros's organization often tries to get these guys elected, but it's not just Soros. I mean, it's like a ton of progressive orgs, try to focus on DAs to try to get guys like Krasner and Chesa Boudin, elected in these cities. And they've gotten elected in a few cities. So that's the soft on crime approach, is progressive.
And that hasn't worked, right? Is that fair to say?
I would say that it has not worked. Well, I mean, it depends on what you think working means, because Chesa is sympathetic, I believe, to the idea that criminals are a revolutionary class, that criminals as a class are a revolutionary class, which was an idea popular in the early 70s when his parents and his step-parents were left-wing terrorists.
Right.
But by the 2000s, Chesa Boudin, is like, he's hanging out with movie stars. He's a famous guy, and he's well accepted. Progressivism built, and it really captured, as education polarization comes from the fact that as our society moved toward knowledge work as the pillar of our economy, right? As we shifted from mass manufacturing in small cities to, knowledge work in big cities being the principal driver, which is a shift that came from fundamental things that I'll talk about some other day. As that shift happened, you get this intellectual sort of upper middle overclass, right? Which includes everyone from Elon Musk down to just like, your lowliest programmer, or person at associate in an investment bank or whatever. So you get those, the knowledge working class became progressive, and colleges were the locus of this progressivism. And I don't think this was pushed by the institutions themselves. I think administrators acceded to it by doing a bunch of stuff that progressive activists wanted, like, let's hire some more DEI people, let's do, programs to make you feel safe in the dorms, blah, blah, blah. But this is all grassroots. This is grassroots. Operationalized things, policies, are astroturf. They are motivated by rich people. If you're talking about Soros money, you're talking about progressive DAs, get progressive DA elected. That's the operationalized policy version of a grassroots thing that came from, that was, so you get operationalized, you get like Chesa Boudin, Soros funding Chesa Boudin, Ta-Nehisi Coates writing, things about the carceral state. And then you get a whole bunch of people who are just mad about mass incarceration. So grassroots, the more vague the goals, the more likely it is to be grassroots, because the people at the grassroots don't know exactly what they're pissed off about. They're not all a bunch of bloggers. You don't have like a million bloggers in the street revolting, right? You have a million regular people who know they're pissed off, and they don't exactly know what they're pissed off about. They have a general idea, but then they really don't know what to do about it, right? They're pissed off. They don't know what to do about it, which is why they go into the street in the first place and shout. And so, and then you get the rich people operationalizing it, the educated people theorizing it, and then the rich people operationalizing it. And then the policy people who are not rich people but are funded by them are the tip of the spear. So people like, right? That's the pipeline, I think, for these movements. And I think conservatism works a little bit different. And I can talk about that more later. But progressivism, you saw this wave building of like, in the 1987, it was like, God, I don't like, all these Christian conservatives annoy me, and like, whatever, right? I'm getting harassed at my job. And then like by 2017, right? That's 30 years later. 30 years later, you've got the tip of the spear. You've got progressive DAs, you've got Me Too, you've got Nature magazine changing itself to do all this woke stuff, about indigenous science or God knows what. And then so this is all part of a big wave, one big wave that lasted 4 decades. No, 3 decades, I'd say, because for the early 80s and late 70s, liberals were just like on the run. But then they started rebuilding. They collected themselves and started rebuilding in the late 80s. And I would say that there was this great wave of progressivism that crested in the late 2010s. Despite Trump is just a reaction to that. And it crested, and it became too extreme, and it overreached, and a lot of the operationalized stuff was wrong, and then the wave crested and is now rolling back. Have you heard the wave rolled back speech?
No.
Have you ever seen Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
No, I read the book, I think, or read the essay or whatever.
Right. Okay. So do you want me to just recite a Hunter S. Thompson quote?
Sure.
He said, all right, I'll read this whole speech. It's great. Strange memories on this nervous night in Las Vegas. 5 years later, 6. It seems like a lifetime, or at least a main era. The kind of peak that never comes again. San Francisco in the middle 60s was a very special time and place to be a part of. Maybe it meant something, maybe not in the long run. But no explanation, no mix of words or music or memories can touch that sense of knowing that you were there and alive in that corner of time in the world, whatever it meant. History is hard to know because of all the hired bullshit. But even without being sure of history, it seems entirely reasonable to think that every now and then, the energy of a whole generation comes to a head in a long, fine flash for reasons that nobody really understands at the time and which never explain in retrospect what actually happened. My central memory of that time seems to hang on 1 or 5 or maybe 40 nights, or very early mornings, when I left the Fillmore half crazy and instead of going home, aimed the big 650 Lightning across the Bay Bridge at 100 miles an hour wearing LL Bean shorts and a Butte sheepherder's jacket, booming through the Treasure Island Tunnel at the lights of Oakland and Berkeley and Richmond, not quite sure which turnoff to take when I got to the other end, always stalling at the toll gate, too twisted to find neutral when I fumbled for change. But being absolutely certain that no matter which way I went, I would come to a place where people were just as high and wild as I was. No doubt at all about that. There was madness in any direction at any hour, if not across the bay, then up the Golden Gate or down 101 to Los Altos or La Honda. You could strike sparks anywhere. There was a fantastic universal sense that whatever we were doing was right and that we were winning. And that, I think, was the handle. That sense of inevitable victory over the forces of old and evil. Not in any mean or military sense. We didn't need that. Our energy would simply prevail. There was no point in fighting, on our side or theirs. We had all the momentum. We were riding the crest of a high and beautiful wave. So now, less than 5 years later, you can go up on a steep hill in Las Vegas and look west. And with the right kind of eyes, you can almost see the high water mark, that place where the wave finally broke and rolled back.
That's great.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
It's probably, that may be my favorite passage that's ever been written. Maybe. It's certainly top 5. He's so good, and that's the best thing he ever wrote. But yeah, the wave broke and rolled back. And, if you were in the BLM street movements of 2014 and 2015, that was an ecstatic place to be. That felt like the cresting of a wave that began in the 80s before many of the people were even cognizant of politics who were participatory in the street movements of the late 2010s. But it was still, you have all these old 50-year-old anarchists saying, these guys just took everything from us. You can read those articles. It was big. This is before George Floyd protests, whatever, 2020. This is 2014. All right. I would say 2014 and 2015 for student activists and for hardcore street activists, that was the crest of the wave. That was what Trump was a reaction against in 2016. And if you were part of that movement, which I was not, but which many of my friends were, I didn't go protest at all, in those protests. I was just like, whatever, I'm a professor. I've got to do this, and I thought at the time, I thought this is a little disappointing. I had been excited about the building progressivism, and in the 2000s, I was very excited. And by the 2010s, and I loved Obama, and I went to his rallies, and and wrote very progressive stuff in the early 2010s, and Occupy Wall Street's great. The Seattle protests were actually right about stuff. We need to let a whole bunch of people out of prison. The blah blah blah. The 2010s, I was like, no, you guys, you've got it wrong, and you're gonna get it wrong. You're gonna this is gonna not end well. And but I wasn't like strongly against it. I wasn't like, I didn't become a reactionary. I didn't become a conservative. I was just like, okay, you know what? I'm going to sit here and watch this not go well. And that's going to take 10 years. I'm going to sit here for the next 10 years. And then someday there'll be country will turn conservative again, and everyone will, be listening to like Billy Graham the Third or whatever, and like, everyone will be like, Law and Order, and it'll be back to, when I was a kid, right? It'll be back to where it was in like 1992, when you had the Christian Coalition. Someday you'll have all this, and we'll forget why, and we'll forget what that was a reaction to, and then I'll be here saying, oh, that again. And that's what I just decided in 2014, 2015, when I saw where things were headed. Like, okay. But, there was a lot of potential good to be done, I thought, from progressive economic ideas. And so in the 2010s, during the Trump years, I wrote strongly in support of a lot of progressive economic ideas, right? And in support of progressive social causes, although I thought like all the street movements were not going to, turn out great. But I thought that maybe we can use that energy to get some movement on progressive social causes like reducing mass incarceration or something. And so I wrote strongly that. And there is an exception to that, which is the Me Too movement. I actually think Me Too, you can say it went too far and overreached in a couple cases, like Aziz Ansari. There were cancellations of people who didn't deserve it, right? And there was dumb stuff associated with that movement. But overall, I think that the Me Too movement, which was not a street movement, no one marched in the street for Me Too. It was an online movement and a movement within elite centers. But I think that we really did clean out a lot of the scummy sexual harassment from like the entertainment industry, especially. Like in the 2000s, people told me like, oh yeah, like Harvey Weinstein, like that guy makes actresses sleep with him for parts. He's complete scuzzbag. And I was like, well, that's just the way the world works. Someday we'll figure out some way to get rid of that, but I don't know how. And then we figured out how. It was Twitter, right? And so I think, and a lot of people in tech are really mad at me about that because they remember the cases that are unfair. Like Joe Lonsdale got just falsely accused, right? Got falsely accused. There were a lot of there were some false rape accusations. There were people who were accused of being like Ellen Powell's sexism lawsuit was basically bullshit against Kleiner Perkins. That was bullshit. Or Reddit also. Did she bring lawsuits against both those or just accuse both of them?
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors.
Hey, finance leaders, do you remember when Amazon didn't have to charge sales tax on every online purchase? Well, 10 years later, we see sales tax on e-commerce everywhere. That wave is now hitting SaaS and the digital economy, and Anrock is here to help you navigate this new tax compliance journey. As your software business grows, so does your global tax liability. But keeping up with ever-changing regulations across multiple jurisdictions can be overwhelming. That's where Anrock comes in. Anrock is the enterprise-grade solution that automates sales tax compliance worldwide. Anrock tracks your exposure, calculates tax, and handles filings all in one platform. As a Turpentine Finance listener, you can get a free Nexus study from Anrock today. See your economic and physical nexus in real time by connecting your billing and HRIS tools. You'll get a clear view of your exact exposure in any jurisdiction, plus a live review with a SaaS tax expert. Don't let tax compliance slow down your growth. Visit anrock.com/turpentine to claim your free Nexus study and take control of your SaaS tax strategy. Anrock, empowering software businesses to grow across the globe.
Hey everyone, Eric here. At Turpentine, we're always looking for ways to streamline our work. That's why we use Notion for all our internal documents. It's been a game changer for us, and I want to tell you why. Notion is this amazing all-in-one workspace that combines your notes, docs, and projects. But what's really cool is their new Notion AI. It's like having multiple AI tools built right in. You can search, generate, analyze, and chat, all without leaving Notion. What sets Notion AI apart is how it personalizes responses based on your content. It's not just another generic chatbot, it understands the context of your work. Plus, it can search across thousands of docs in seconds, even connecting to tools like Slack and Google Docs. And get this, Notion is used by over half of the Fortune 500 companies. Teams using it send less emails, cancel more meetings, and save time searching for their work. It's designed to keep everyone on the same page while protecting your privacy. Want to give it a try? Head over to notion.com/upstreampod. That's all lowercase. Notion.com/upstreampod. You can try Notion for free, and when you use our link, you're supporting our show. Give the powerful, easy-to-use Notion AI a shot today at notion.com/upstreampod.
I think it was just Kleiner. I think I wouldn't be surprised if she also did Reddit. It was very litigious.
She did say it. I think she didn't actually sue Reddit. but I'm not 100% about that. I didn't follow it that closely, but like that, whatever, that was like one sort of drama queen. But like overall, Me Too was great. Saying that there were a couple bad cases and excesses in Me Too would get you canceled by the Me Too people. And I remember, my old boss at Bloomberg sitting across the table at dinner when I said that Aziz Ansari, the cancellation of Aziz Ansari was an overreach. He just thundered at me like, with Trump in the White House, how dare you say that? He got really mad. And then, but that's how it was. Like Trump being there in the driver's seat became the focus of all this progressive anger during his first term. And his presence in the White House was the reason progressivism went even farther. I think some parts had already gone too far by 2014. But by 2020, man, it was all because of Trump. When I said these riots, most Floyd protests were not riots, but there were a few riots. There was a riot in Minneapolis. There was a small riot in DC. There were massive, like, ongoing riots in like Portland, and there were some riots in LA. They're basically like 4, maybe 5 cities where there were riots. So when people call them the riots, there were riots. Most of the protests were not. But I don't like riots. When I was a kid, I liked the idea of riots. I thought, yeah, riot, because I listened to that Sublime song, right? The early 90s progressivism included a romantic attachment to the riots and violence of the 60s. And so you have that Office episode where the old black guy is like doing his Black Panther salute. Because we romanticize the actual Black Panthers. They killed their secretary because she found out they were dealing drugs. Like some of the Black Panthers, like Bobby Seale, like he's a smart guy, like he's an intellectual, and it's, I can understand where the Black Panthers came from, but they were violent at the time, and their offshoots under like Cleaver, whatever, were even more violent. And so that kind of went wrong, but yet we romanticized it anyway. But yeah, Trump being there in the White House is what allowed that to happen. I remember telling this guy, Andreas Shu, who is Rev Howard Arson on Twitter. He's a Google guy. I was telling Andreas, these riots are bad. It's going to provoke a backlash. And he's like, this is only happening. These are anti-Trump riots. These are only happening because Trump's in the White House. We have a fascist in the White House. Of course, riots are the appropriate response. He's the kind of guy who would have clucked at riots if Trump hadn't been in office. If it had been Hillary Clinton, he would have clucked at the riots. He's he's an educated coastal liberal guy. He's obsessed with online fights, but he's like, that's who he is, right? And he's like a rich coastal, educated guy who he doesn't really want chaos. He just wants his team to win. And so 2020, the craziness of that, it wouldn't have happened without COVID and the lockdowns, of course, but it also wouldn't have happened without Trump in the White House. That was a perfect storm. 2020 is a real perfect storm. And it led to a lot of overreaches. It led to progressive stuff overreaching more than otherwise would have, with these insane DEI programs that say like punctuality is white supremacy. Just the insane shit. Like rational, independent thought is white supremacy. Shut the fuck up. That's racist. Like the ludicrousness of the stuff that was implemented in 2020 and 2021. And, the defund the police stuff, that's just insane level of overreach. And that happened because of a confluence of factors, partly COVID, but I think Trump being in the White House was really the thing. That's why that's one among many reasons why I don't want Trump back. Like, I don't want that back. And now I think that America's tired and the progressive org's all self-destructed from internal cancel wars, right? I don't think we're going to get 2020 back, but I think that Trump being in the White House will become a focus for anger. He's going to do so much stupid stuff and say so much stupid stuff over the course of 4 years if he gets in a couple weeks. If he gets in there, he's going to just it's going to be just one stupid outrage after another. Remember when those guys with MAGA hats were in the White House, like these kids from this Covington Catholic school? Someone thought they were making fun of a Native American guy. They weren't actually, but then they were just like, what do we say to this guy? They didn't know. But someone thought they were making fun of him, and it became this huge thing. People got sued for libel, and people just screamed and raged for days. I don't want that back. And I don't think we're going quite back to that, because I think people are just fucking exhausted. But I think that we won't get on to the next thing. It will hurt the correction of the progressive overreach will be hurt if Trump gets back into office. Because conservatism will then not be a movement thing. It will be whatever this old asshole just spouts this week on Twitter or wherever, Truth Social or whatever. People are like, oh, but it's actually going to be Musk running the show. Where's Bannon?
So if you had to predict, let's say we're having this conversation like, in 2040, Econ 102 is the most popular podcast in the world by 2040. And we're kind of reflecting on like, okay, what were the 2020s and 2030s like for the Democrat Party or for the sort of where progressivism went? Like, do you think supply side progressivism or this abundance movement really takes the fore, or where do you think the party and the movement is going? I know it depends on what who wins and stuff like this, but over a long enough time period, like where's the arc going?
Right. So I think right now supply side progressivism is mostly an intellectual thing. The YIMBY movement is the grassroots version, but people aren't marching for housing supply in the streets much. You can get a bit of grassroots action, but it's mostly an intellectual thing. Most abundant stuff is guys like Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson and Jen Harris and Todd Tucker and people like that, and me sitting around saying like, what would make America great if we had more houses, more energy, more stuff? And I think we're right. We're right about that. And yet people aren't going to march in the street for that. So what's going to be the new progressivism? The answer is by 2040, it's not going to yet be apparent what the new well, maybe by 2040, but certainly by 2035, we're not going to know. Because progressivism is going to be on the run for at least another decade. If this is 1976, I would say that in the mid 2030s, progressives are going to pick up after a conservative decade. Progressives are going to pick up from the ashes like they did in 1987, and we're going to start to see the glimmering of a new progressivism coming from the grassroots and from art and from intellectual stuff. And we don't quite know what that's going to look like any more than the 60s people could have known what progressivism would look like in like the 90s, right? It's hard for us to know. Or people, if you were standing in 1975, it was hard to imagine 1992, even though it was just, whatever, a few years away. I don't think we're going to know exactly what it's going to look like, but I hope you can make prophecies. You can imagine scenarios too. We can imagine that I can imagine really bad scenarios where it looks like sort of like the Palestine leftism of today, decolonize America, destroy America, blah, 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 where that's the cool thing that all the kids like. I can imagine that. I can imagine a much better version too, where it's like, America's society basically heals itself and puts itself back together, and everybody is, like the whole culture. Are you there? Where'd you go, Haas?
Yes.
Okay, I can hear you.
Yep. I'm still here, just charging my laptop.
Are we okay? Oh, okay. There you are. All right. Yeah, no. So you can imagine a good version where basically America puts itself back together, right? And progressivism is a far more like benign thing. Yeah. Like you can imagine progressivism that's very sort of like, more pro-American in character, more like the progressivism of like, say, the 50s and early 60s. Right? You can imagine that. What are so progressivism likes civil rights struggles. What will be the civil rights struggle? Like who are excluded groups? And the thing is that America's gotten pretty good about not excluding groups, right? But poor people, we haven't gotten good about class. Poor people in America are still excluded. And I can imagine a progressivism that's more focused on class stuff. And a progressivism that's more focused on like, well, poor people are still, like poor people are forgotten in America. They're sitting there dealing with like all this shit all day. Like, oh, I'm getting evicted, because I got fired, or like I got like a parking tickets, too many parking tickets, and now my car got towed. Or can you get that towed for? No, I guess not. But you can get towed for like missing payments, or like all these things. Like that's poor people's life in America is just day-to-day stuff. Like my job didn't give me any hours. I'm for a reinvigorated, cross-racial, class-focused movement. And you don't have to call it socialism. I mean, 100 years ago, you'd call any left of center thing socialism, right? Socialism was wanting a weekend in 1910. Okay. We won't necessarily call it socialism, although some people will, but we won't necessarily call it that. We may call it progressivism. I don't know what we'll call it, but I believe we've made very little progress on the class problems in America. I believe we've made a lot of progress on race. I believe we've made huge progress on gender stuff, more than on race. I believe that racial problems are getting harder because the racial landscape's getting more complex. In 1975, it was black people and white people. That's what you got, right? Now, everybody's like, like you've got like, half Bengali and like half Cuban people versus like, like arguing with like, like half Polish and half Peruvian people. I don't even know, right? Like, yeah, the racial landscape's getting more complex. And by the way, that's why affirmative action had to die. Because when it's just black and white, it's like, okay, help the black people. Easy. And America always wants to help the black people. We one of our consistent things is wanting to help black people do better. That is the essence of wokeness. So I do believe that the desire to help black people will be a consistent theme and will feature in the next progressivism, because it always does. That's the one constant of American life. I think gender stuff is going to be less important the next time, because we haven't fixed everything about gender relations in America, but we fixed so much of it that it's hard to get grassroots anger. Like sexual harassment was the ultimate thing, right? That was the last. If you're a woman, I mean, there's systematic stuff like crime and public safety, but that doesn't lend itself to progressive cause necessarily. You're a woman, it's scary to walk around at night, blah, blah. But systematically in white collar educated spaces, the main problem was sexual harassment, was, guys being uncomfortable around a female coworker and sort of talking too much about sex, and like you feel excluded, like, or like people you worked with just, making too many passes at you and like, mixing business and personal stuff too much. Like those things you can say, okay, is that really so bad? Was your life really so bad? But like, you can say that, but people care about making their lives better. Like that was the answer is, don't poo-poo that until you've been on the receiving end of it. I don't think Me Too 100% fixed that, but I think it fixed enough of it in the spaces where it was still really bad that there's not going to be huge motivation for that anymore. I think the next progressive movement will be focused on black people to some degree, because it always is. I think it'll be focused on gender less. I hope that it'll be focused on class more. I hope that the strength of conservatives in recruiting working class Latino and possibly working class black people to their side, I think that will potentially result, and also interracial marriage will cause more of a focus on class stuff, because honestly, like, life still sucks if you're poor in America for a variety of reasons, and the poor people in America are forgotten. Like, when's the last time you even saw a photo essay from a poor neighborhood in America? Right? You certainly don't walk around in one. Maybe you walk past some like, poor guys just sitting out and drinking in an alleyway in San Francisco. You ever see those guys? Or in a park?
Yeah.
You see those guys. You don't know who they are. You don't know what they do. You don't know anything about them. You're completely disconnected. Those are the forgotten people of America. Black people as a racial group in America are not forgotten, but poor black people, poor working class and poor and working class black people who are just hanging out in some town in like Savannah or wherever. Those people are forgotten because of their class. People remember them because they're black, but then Matt Iglesias made a good point on Twitter today. We've been arguing a bit, but he made a good point, which is that progressive, educated, like white or Asian or Middle Eastern progressives, like these people don't know many working class black and Latino people. So they imagine that working class black and Latino people have the exact same interests as the sort of activists that they know. They're like, the queer Latinx drama club people, or whatever, or Ta-Nehisi Coates himself. They imagine that those people are representative of the working class, but they're not. So like, if you look at working class black people, they really want stronger policing, and it was in part a working class black revolt against defund the police that made all these pro-police politicians get elected in 2021, and that started the backlash against the overreach. And so it was working class black people were like, no, I am victimized by crime. Please arrest these guys. Please, state capacity, save me. And they recognize that there is, there's some racial discrimination in policing, but it's better. That's better than anarchy. So that happened, and I think you're going to get. I hope that the progressivism of the late 2030s that really matures in the 2040s and 50s will be class focused. Obviously, it will not be entirely class focused. There will be a focus on black people because there always is. That's the one constant of American reform movements. But I think that beyond that, I think that a class focus will be really important. And you saw this in the early 20th century. You saw this the class focus of like the Roosevelt years. The people they wanted to help included people that we now call the white working class. And now in our most recent incarnation of progressivism, we have this conceit that the only reason they wanted to help those people is because they were white. But that's not true. It was simply a more class-focused age. And I hope that's what comes back, because the poor people in America are just forsaken. We lob some money at them in the form of a sort of kludgy, badly administered welfare state. And that's fine. That's good. I support that. We need to improve the welfare state, but I love throwing money at poor people. It's just not enough, right? There's such a out like educated people who are now much more likely to be progressive are just so goddamn out of touch, including the educated conservatives who believe themselves to be stewards of the real working class. They're out of touch as hell. Like, all the people who are like, yeah, Republican Party, real party of the working class. You're out of touch. You're a coastal frickin' urban metropolitan educated rich person. Like, or at least you're a country gentry, sort of like small town car dealership rich person. You're out of touch with the working class, and everyone's out of touch with the working class. Because we just don't, we don't have big dense cities where you hang out with the working class all day. We don't have like factories where the line workers and the bosses intermingle and talk to each other. We don't have, like, people are out of touch because we are such a big country and everyone's spread out. We live in the cultural equivalent of gated communities and sometimes the literal equivalent of gated communities. And you go to like tech parties and tech events, right? And without doxing anyone by saying whose parties we go to, we went to a party for Fleet Week, and that party had bartenders at it. And that's the only time I've seen that in the tech world. And that's why I like those people whose Fleet Week party we went to, because that was you saw some, like, they're not poor, obviously, but they do working class stuff for a living, right? And I love to see that. But you almost never see that in tech stuff, right? Like, how many bartenders are going to be coming to the Halloween party that we're at next week? How many, like, you won't see that. You won't see, baristas, and you won't see, like public school teachers, and you won't see just people who have some random job in the city government working for the transportation office. You won't see, like construction workers. You won't see those people at our parties. They exist. There's plenty of those people around, but they are not coming to our parties. We are out of touch. My understanding of the working class is it fades more with every year, right? I understand the Japanese working class because if you go to a party with Japanese investment bankers and tech people and whoever, they will invite bartenders to their party. They will invite people who work in an izakaya to their party, right? They'll invite random office assistants to like their party. Like, Japan is not a class society in the way that America is a class society, but we are. Education is the big divide. Income is secondary to education, but income is also a divide. I'm not going to say that rich people and poor people aren't separate. They are. But education is the big divide. It's us and a bunch of knowledge workers, right? We might invite like a poor grad student to our party, but they're part of the upper class because anytime they can go get a job in tech and be rich. It's permanent, what Milton Friedman called permanent income. It's your earning power, not your earnings. And so it's your earnings potential, not your earnings today. That's what really determines class, and that's what education gives you. Okay, like we talk about these like poor, shabby, downwardly mobile humanities majors. You could sell out any day you want. You can sell out, and that knowledge makes you upper class. That ability, that potential, permanent income is what makes you up. Actually, there's a blog post right there. Class is permanent income. That's actually a good post. But yeah, we all know this. We all know we're out of touch. We all know we have this society where the educated people escaped. We escaped blue collar America. And we left them to fend for themselves. We forsook them. And then we lobbed, what do we give them? Money and like wokeness memes. That's what we lobbed in their general direction. In the meantime, they're not getting married. They're doing a shit ton of drugs. Those are coping responses. Those aren't reasons to think that uneducated people are shit. Those are coping responses to to the educated class forsaking them instead of living among them and uplifting them. And I did this too. I did it, right? Like, so I'm including me. Yes, I did it. And then all the conservatives who claim to care about the working class, you did it too. You ran away from the working class people. You want nothing to do with those people. You want to just do the same thing. You want to lob policies and memes in their direction while you personally run away from them. You want to give them, you want to, like, you know, cancel immigration. Maybe that'll raise the wages of working class people. Will it actually? No, but that's what, you know, the educated conservatives are all thinking about right now. Oh, if we just stop the immigration, then no, that won't help the working class. But you know, you allow yourself to imagine that it would. Or just like conservative memes about like just hating, you know, do you think like hating on wokeness, do you think that actually like helps the working class? I mean, you can tell yourself it does, but you're really just lobbing memes in their direction as you don't hang out with them at all. Like, nobody's going to church. Everybody's doing drugs. No one's getting married. The working class, and I'm talking about the black working class, the Hispanic working class, the white working class, the whole working class is, you know, abandoned and turning to all these coping behaviors, unhealthy coping behaviors, because, you know, because we left them. And I hope the next progressivism is, to some degree, to as much a degree possible, a class-focused progressivism that focuses on power to regular people. And I don't think it's, you know, like, I can go into what I think that will entail further, you know, later, but I don't actually know yet. Because remember, intellectuals come after street movements. People are going to have to get mad about the conditions of the working class and start, you know, just marching in the street and getting mad. And then activists will support them. And then there'll be like hipster liberal subcultures focused on actually going and connecting with the working class. And that'll be a cool thing. That it has happened before. Like, you know, there have been, like, if you read like On the Road, you know, Jack Kerouac, he's like a beatnik guy. He's an educated, you know, like educated progressive type of artsy fartsy hipster, but he's going and doing farm labor, right? He's hanging out with farm workers. He actually getting in touch with the working class a little bit. And because there was still this, in the 50s, there was still this remnant of this early 20th century class-focused progressivism. So bring back class, I say. That's where the future of the thing is. Right now, we're going to deal with like a decade in which we have the fallout from the overreach and limitations of the progressive movement that was building my whole life. That wave is rolling back. The wave gathered and gathered and gathered and built, and then the crest was in the late 2010s, and was in 2017 to 2021 was the long fine flash of this crest, or maybe let's say 2014, because that's when street activism was at its peak. Right, that street activism was the equivalent of like the parties Hunter S. Thompson was going to in San Francisco and the protests, anti-Vietnam protests. Right, that was the stuff he was going to in San Francisco. Do drugs, have sex, go to protest, go to a club. Like, that's what he was doing. And you can see pictures of what San Francisco looked like in the middle 60s, right? It was just like a bunch of like hot white people doing drugs, getting laid, and like fighting against the man and Vietnam and, you know, whatever. And that was our 2014 and 2015 was that, right? The activist street movements. I don't know how many people were getting laid. Somebody was, but then like that was the energy. And the Bernie Sanders movement, you know, was just a slightly separate branch of that. You know, I like people, you know, everybody I knew had that energy. When I came out here in like beginning of 2016, I remember some guy, or anyway, people would just yell Bernie Sanders at me in the street, and you know, the energy was insane. Like, I'd hang out with tech people, and there'd be all these like progressive people and tech people talking about, like, you know, which protest they were going to, BLM protest. This is way before 2020. And, you know, you had the Google protests against like pretty much everything at Google. Google people protested everything about Google. Cancel culture was an online version of protesting. But you had a lot of this energy online. The energy of the 2010s, the progressive energy of the 2010s is not coming back for a long time. The wave is now receding, and it will build again, and the tide will come back. A new wave will come. Cycles, things move in cycles, but we are headed for a more conservative decade. And we are in 1976. Whether it's Trump getting elected will slow that rollback. Trump getting elected will, if it happens, Trump getting elected will will make the conservative movement stupider than it would have been, because it'll still have its reactionary character instead of, Nixon, like conservatism in the 60s and 70s in the early 70s is so dumb you don't even hear about it. It was just like, just a bunch of like hippie punching. Like you don't even hear what it was anymore. George Wallace, I don't know. But then if you, or people supporting Nixon and Watergate the same way people support Trump and January 6th now. Just these stubborn dead-ender political junkie assholes. That was all there. But then the conservatism you hear about, the conservatism that reshaped America for a generation was, grassroots Christian conservative stuff, was, Reaganite conservatism. That's what won in the late 70s and early 80s. And it was a constructive movement-based conservatism that built something. Right now, we're still in reaction mode. And it's tech guys trying to lead the charge, because tech guys, you sit around programming computers and whatnot, and they're very late to everything. So they still think it's 2014, 2015, and they're part of like this, frog meme army, even though alt-right energy is kind of dying too. Like, some congressman posted like some anime meme of like chopping off AOC's head as like Attack on Titan, blah, blah, blah. Like, bro, you're so 10 years out of date. Like it's been 10 years since like the alt-right, 8 years since the alt-right was a big deal. The alt-right died at Charlottesville.
But unfortunately, I do have to cut this short because I have a 12 o'clock I'm late to. But I think this has been an amazing sort of historical overview and sort of prediction as to where the future, and kind of a call to arms for the a class-based progressivism.
A call to arms for like a generation that will be way too young to hear that call to arms. Maybe I'll write a book that someone will discover in 15, 20 years.
Well, on that note, Noah, this is a great episode. As always, until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and erictornberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.